Welcome to the Oral History Podcast, featuring stories from the oral history website voicesofoklahoma.com, where Oklahomans have given generously of their time to tell their life stories for present-day listeners and for generations to come. Our entire collection is available on the website voicesofoklahoma.com. Subscribe to be notified of new Oklahoma oral history podcasts. Here's another interesting storyteller from voicesofoklahoma.com. Clarke's Good Clothes, founded in 1929 in Tulsa by Harry Clarke Sr., developed into a clothing store for men, women, and children. From its downtown location, the store expanded to Utica Square Shopping Center in 1962 and then to the 50,000 square foot store in Southland Shopping Center at 41st and Yale. In 1976, the expansion continued to Tulsa's Woodland Hills Mall at 71st and Memorial, and then on to Joplin in Oklahoma City. Harry Clarke Sr. was very well known in the Tulsa community, and following in his father's footsteps, Harry Clarke Jr. also participated in local business and civic organizations. Further, his sister, Madge Clarke Wright, who served as Vice President of Advertising and Public Relations, became active in Tulsa, coordinating Miss Oklahoma's wardrobe and teaching watercolor painting at the Philbrook Museum of Art. Clarke's Good Clothes was known for special promotions such as Straw Hat Days and Coffee Call. Harry Clarke Jr. is the storyteller of this Oklahoma retail success. Listen to his account on the Oklahoma Oral History website, voicesofoklahoma.com.
I'm here with Harry Clarke on this, the 4th day of April, 09.
I'm Harry Clarke at Clarke's Good Clothes, second generation. Dad started the business about 1914 in Bristow, Oklahoma. Had stores in the small oil towns, Slick, Stroud, Drumright, Cushing, and then bought the store in Tulsa in 1929. I was 1 year old when we moved to Tulsa.
State your age and birth date.
December 16, 1928. I was 80 in December. 80th birthday last December. Still doing fine. Jogged 2 miles this morning. Good Lord willing, I'll be here a long time.
And you're in good shape, too.
Oh, yeah. And I'm still selling real estate around the lake. Believe in staying active.
Okay, so in 1929, he came to Tulsa.
And the main reason there, they were doing well in Bristow, but Louis Grant was the head of Home Federal, Savings and Loan. Louis had moved from Bristow to Tulsa, and they just kept after Dad to move over here. So finally, storefront came available. It was Cruz Kelly at 317 South Main in downtown Tulsa. Cruz Kelly there was the father of Ira Cruz that had Cruz Lumber Company for so many years down on, I believe it was 2nd Street. I've still got the original bill of sale. $18,000 is what he paid.
So your dad bought it from Cruz Kelly.
Cruz Kelly was 2 people, and they ran the store. Kelly worked for us a long time after.
So Cruz is one person.
Cruz and Kelly, those were the 2 partners in the business that he bought.
So they already had a clothing store.
There was a clothing store there. They weren't doing too well.
So your father, his name again was?
Harry Clarke.
So you're junior.
Well, I'm really not. Dad was Walter Harry Clarke, and I'm Harry Alfred Clarke. Dad didn't like Walter, so he went by Harry, and so when I came along, I didn't like my nickname, so I became Harry Jr.
So you bought the clothing store, Cruz Kelly, and then revitalized the business.
Yes, he came in and went to work on it, built the business. Madge, my sister, came into the business a little ahead of me. She went to TU and worked in the business. We both grew up in it. Every Saturday, I was down in the stockroom, wiping boxes, helping mark merchandise. So you kind of come by it naturally. Madge was the artist, the talent there, and later was my partner and ran the promotional end of the business.
And clothes were for all ages?
Yeah. Well, originally we were men's, women's, and then we had boys department. And then in 61, we were having a tough time because we didn't have a suburban store. Utica had opened in 51.
Utica Square.
Utica Square, the first group of stores that opened there, and we were not there. And in 61, a furniture store and another store were going out of business. King Dixon was the furniture store. He was an early pioneer furniture merchant. He always kind of liked me, and King called me and said, "You need that store." And we did. So we did a lease and opened in November of 61.
And that location?
And the location we had in Utica Square for all those years. And later we got the corner, which was, I think, called the Sportsman, was a sporting goods store. That's where we put the men's store.
Then you had your downtown store?
Kept the downtown store.
And Utica Square.
Opened Utica Square. Southland was supposed to open in 62, I think, and it didn't. It was 65 before it opened, and that, of course, was the big store, the main store.
So then you had 3 stores going?
3 stores.
How long were you able to have 3 stores?
Well, I see Woodland came along. Somewhere along in there, we'd open a store in Joplin, and then we ended up opening 2 in Oklahoma City.
How many stores did you have at one time?
7. A couple too many. When they built them all at Joplin, we got a chance to get in there. Joplin at that time was really growing and booming, and then later it hit a slow patch. We had a chance to get out of Joplin, and we did.
So you had 3 stores when Woodland Hills came about?
Yeah, 3 stores and going very strong in Tulsa. The downtown was going down, but Utica and Southland were both very strong. Both did about the same performance in square footage sales. Utica was more women's than it was men's, just because of the configuration of the store. Southland was really the balanced store. Our business was about 65% women's and girls and 45% men's and boys.
When you went to high school, you were the best-dressed guy in school, weren't you?
No, I went to military school.
Really?
Yeah. During the war, it looked like we were going to be in there a while. So I think Dad and Mom figured that I would have a better chance if I had a better military education. Western Military Academy, Alton, Illinois. That's where I went to high school.
All 4 years?
Yeah, really was up there 5 years. And it paid off well because what I learned there really helped keep me alive in Korea. I missed World War II, but spent 13 months in Korea. I was there, read the ceasefire to my command, July 27th of 53, if I remember right.
What was your job?
I was a second lieutenant. I was the supply platoon leader for the 2nd Division.
You were a commissioned officer because of your high school military?
College. I had a commission out of high school in the Illinois National Guard. But then I spent a year in New York going to school, in retail school, then went over to Stillwater and finished up and was in advanced ROTC. So I had a commission coming out of there. And the pattern was shortly after you graduate, they'd take you into the service and they would send you for 4 months to school. They sent me to Fort Lee, Virginia. Then they would send you close to home for 4 months, Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and then off to Korea.
What year was that?
I got there in February of 53, and then I think the ceasefire was July 27th of that same year. And then I got out of there in March of 4, came back into the business. You got a readjustment coming out of that and back in, but Madge was there. She was doing the promotion. She wasn't running the promotions yet, but she was there. In 57, Dad had a pretty serious heart attack, and ready or not, Madge and I had to pretty much take over.
How old would you have been about that time?
28, I guess.
When your father had the heart attack at 57?
Yeah. Now, he was still there, but we kind of picked up the reins along in there.
You had this single store downtown?
Single store downtown.
Let's talk about the downtown store for a bit here.
Those were the days.
Those were good days, weren't they?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, everything was downtown. John Duncan was still there.
What was John Duncan?
Brown Duncan.
Brown Duncan.
Mrs. Brown, Oklahoma City, that was her relative, I think, but he was the partner over here. He ran the store. There was 2 big department stores, Brown Duncan's and Vandiver's. The Vandiver brothers were still alive at that time. I had met them, but I didn't know them that well.
There were 5 Vandiver brothers. They were a department store, and Brown Duncan was a department store.
2 major department stores, yes.
And they sold clothes as well.
Oh, yeah, they sold everything.
So were they competitors then of yours?
Oh, yeah, they were competitors. Renbergs were right next door.
Next door to you?
Yeah, George was right next door. I tell you, the retail community ran the credit bureau. You know, we competed like the Dickens for business, but we worked together. At one point, Tulsa had its own credit card, had a little blue credit card, and there were 6 people, the department stores, Renberg's, Clarke's, Frug's, which was another department store right across the street, Mike Frug, and a couple other stores later joined in. But you could have that credit card. This is before the MasterCard and Visa and all that began.
Were you then ahead of your time in a way, or other cities doing that?
It wasn't me. It was just
I meant the community.
Yeah, well, I think most communities did. Tulsa was a very aggressive, progressive community. You know, Tulsa and Dallas were considered the 2 kind of fashion upscale communities in the Southwest. That was exciting to be a part of.
And this was in the 50s and early 60s.
50s, 60s, well, on up into the 70s.
What were some of the restaurants downtown? Where would you go for lunch?
Or Nelson's Buffeteria, and at that time it was located down in the Skelly Building, down 3rd Street. And then Frank had the Coney Islands on down 3rd, west of 3rd there.
Frank the Greek.
Oh, the Greeks. Yeah, they were down there. When I was younger, we had an hour for lunch, and you never went to lunch from 12 to 1 because that was when everyone had lunch hours. So you either went to lunch early or went to lunch late. We'd go down and get a couple of Conies and a pop, and then we'd go over to Sears, which was a block away, and go down to the tool department and spend the rest of the lunch hour looking at all the tools and fishing tackle and all like young kids will. But Sears was a major factor. I think George Thompson was the head of the Sears at that time. But they all, they were the civic part of the town at that time. The civic stuff was pretty much run by the merchants.
You personally were involved in the city.
Yeah, I loved it. Imagine Dad believed in that. He was president of the chamber when he was 35 years old and kept on a second year at 36. When I came back, I got very involved in the Junior Chamber of Commerce. I was president in 57. My first project was getting an elephant for the Tulsa Zoo. And Gunda is still there. We talked to Leroy Sipes, grocery store, very fine grocery store, into giving us $1,000 worth of groceries, and we raffled it off. We raised enough money, and I think Hugh Davis was heading the zoo at that time. They went to Florida and brought that elephant back.
That would have been in
54.
And Gunda the elephant.
He's still there. I was laughing because they were talking about it had been in the zoo 50 years. And yeah, I remember that.
Why was the elephant a project?
Well, the zoo needed an elephant. The Junior Chamber's whole concept was helping young men at that point develop the skills to be civic leaders. We sold fair tickets was another thing we did to raise money, and we did a Christmas shopping tour for needy kids. There was 22 standing committees. I headed membership for 1 year, and we had over 800 members, and about 150 that were really involved. At a state organization. George and I was involved in it. I remember Georgie Boy way back there. I was before he was governor. He was in his 20s at that time.
What was he doing in his 20s?
I don't remember what he was doing, but he was very involved.
Involved in Tulsa?
State organization,
Okay.
Junior Chamber of Commerce. We had a national convention. I went to 3 of those, and that of state conventions, and we were involved in those. You make friends in fact, the year I was president here, Wendell Ford, who is now the senator from Kentucky, I believe, or has been, I don't know whether he still is or not, was the national president. He and I became good friends. When he and his wife were here, when he wasn't traveling, they were out at the house. We had a little old swimming pool. We were kind of their family away from home.
So as you were involved, then other merchants were involved too.
They were involved long before I was. I just came in, and the credit bureau was run by the merchants. Bill Racent headed that. You had to have someone to check the credit out, and so everyone really kind of swapped the credit through the credit bureau. And that's where this credit card came up. Then the Christmas parade was put on by the merchants. Downtown Tulsa Unlimited, Bud Blust, that grew out of an effort to save downtown when everything was going suburban. So the merchant group was kind of the leaders.
Even though you were competing, it was never a hostile competition of any sort.
It was dog eat dog on the day, but it's like most things. There are things you've got to work together on. Mike Frug had Frug's department store, and that was the 3rd department store, kind of, right across from us. I think Orrin Smullion was his son-in-law, and he got me involved in United Way. He called me, and he was kind of cantankerous, but I always got along great. He headed the United Way, the retail part of it, for a number of years, and he shoved that off on me, and I did it, and ended up going all through the chairs. If I've got to pick one thing that I did that I'm most proud of, head the United Way drive. The biggest single job in Tulsa. It's been best part of a year doing it.
How much money do you think you were raising back then?
We raised right at $3 million.
Pretty good amount.
When you figure, I think the minimum wage was $1.25 an hour or something. And town wasn't that big at that point. But not near what Kathleen has been raising lately.
Kathleen Cohen.
A neat lady.
What did a suit cost back then in the 50s?
$100 to $125 to get you a heck of a fine suit.
What brand was it?
Hart Schaffner and Marks. That suit today would cost you probably $700-800. You know, a necktie is an easy way to do it. I remember Uncle John Mabie. John Mabie called Dad one day, and he said, I need some ties for Christmas. I guess he was up in his 70s then, but he came in, and Dad had me help him. The best ties we had in the place were $10 ties. And he picked out a dozen, 15, $10 ties.
John Mabie, tell us who he was.
Oh, he was probably one, if not the richest man in Tulsa. Mabie Center's named after him. He was a mule trader. He started out in the oil business. Liked to play the backward, bumbling guy, just smarter than a fox, so. I know that day we bought those ties. Dad wrote the ticket out, and he said, well, Harry, where do you want me to put my X? You know, I put an X on there, shoot. Dad laughed. And he was the biggest single contributor to the United Way through those years. His name's on a lot of buildings.
At ORU, the Mabie Center.
Mabie Center. That
comes
was
from him, that family.
Came out of the foundation. I met through Dad, largely. So many. Bob McDowell, who was president of DX Oil.
Have any out-of-town celebrities who happen to come into your stores?
Not particularly. I've got some pictures. I've got a bunch of old newspapers. When the movie Tulsa came out and had the premiere in Tulsa, we had a stagecoach parked in front of the store, and Chill Wills climbed up in the driver's seat, and I got some pictures of that. We did the wardrobes for Miss Oklahoma. Madge did. I stayed away from that. For 13 Miss Oklahomas, and had one Jane Ann Giroux.
Jane Giroux, I guess.
Jane Giroux, yeah. Went all the way to Miss America. That was kind of exciting. My sister, unfortunately, passed away early, but at her funeral there were 5 Miss Oklahomas that showed up to pay their respects, which I thought was pretty nice.
You said that the merchants were really major contributors. What about the oil companies and Bill Skelly? And did they play in that?
Oh, yeah. Well, Bill Skelly was a big contributor to everything, all the oil companies. No, the merchants were just kind of the ones that seemed like got things started. You know, you get into aviation, if it hadn't been for Bill Skelly, the airport probably, you know. The old stud horse note, there was 10 or 15 of those guys that would get together and decide to do something. They want to build an airport out there, and they'll count me in for this much, and I'm in this much. They'd put the money up, and then they would figure out how they were going to get the money back if they ever did.
Let's talk about the stud horse note.
What they would do, okay, they wanted to build a bridge across the Arkansas. The oil business was really over on the west side of the river. Slick Stroud, the Rumlight Field and the Cushing Field, those were the big fields, but there was no place for those people to live. And so the bridge in 1901, I think it was built across the Arkansas to bring those people into Tulsa, and they promised to provide them a good place to live. Well, those people all came over here, but when they had some project civically, such as I think the airport was a good example, and they didn't have time to wait for bond issues and all that other stuff, so the heavy hitters.
Do you remember some of those names? Bill Skelly?
Well, Bill Skelly and Bob McDowell was DX. Bill Warren, the Warrens, W.K. Warren, the drilling companies, G.C. Parker, Bobby Parker's dad. I remember him. We lived at 25th and Lewis, was the end of the city. And the Parkers lived at the southeast corner of 21st and Lewis. And of course, Sooner Pipe and Supply was back in there. That's Henry's era. Oh, yeah. That's back kind of when Dad was involved in the chamber.
I was just thinking, did they buy their clothes in Tulsa? Did they buy them from your clothing stores?
Some did, some didn't. That was really never an issue as far as Dad was concerned. They were so good, not only the oil business, but there's so many businesses been so good to Tulsa. You know, this town, when it comes push to shove, will really stand up and, well, you know, you've run enough campaigns when you're on the radio. To do good stuff, man, they'll really get in behind you and help you. Like in 71, I think I ran the United Way drive. Things were tough. I wasn't dealing from strength. I didn't have a big company. But we went out and sold the need. And I remember going to the newspaper, and I asked if I could have the meeting of the editors and everything, and needed their help. It was kind of a tough meeting. They beat me up pretty good. But we wouldn't have made that campaign if they hadn't have.
The Tulsa World gave you a tough time?
Yeah. They were questioning, and that was their job. But then they gave me the publicity we needed to put the drive over. I didn't mind that. That's what I think we need more of today. ask the questions and everything up front rather than wait till after it's over and say, hey, wait a minute, what happened?
Yeah. You mentioned radio a little bit ago. Talk to us about the commercials that you would do for Clarke's Good Clothes.
Okay, well, I came back out of Korea in 54 into the business, and Dad was doing a TV commercial on Sunday evening, Qfinity, sports. Sunday evening, we had to go to the store and pick up all the stuff and take it down to the TV station. We had to do it live, and it was midnight before we got back home. And the display guy had to come down and do the display, and they were one take. It was kind of beginning to change, but Dad said, this is a young men's game. He said, you're going to start doing these. So in 54, about that time, they had started using film, 60-millimeter film. The one that did our production for us, they would share the tape. In other words, you'd do a commercial, and then they'd take it from station to station and play it. But they had a little house on Boulder Park, on the west side of Boulder on the Park, and we would go down there, and they would tape commercial.
Was that a production company, or was it a
No,
TV?
That was Channel 8. That was who did our production. Al Clauser and Roy Pickett were the two guys that filmed those. They set the lighting and everything up, and they had a very big camera, and we'd start doing those. We didn't do as many live. I did a few live. Here came tape along. I did commercials for 25 years. Every Friday morning, Madge had to write them. That's the hardest day's work I ever did. I put them to memory.
So no teleprompter.
Well, they had a teleprompter. I didn't use a teleprompter. You can tell some people, it was just great. And other people, you can just see them word for word for word for word down a teleprompter. So I could typically put a minute spot to memory in about 15 minutes. We did two. I'd kind of memorize one going in, and then I'd forget it and work on the second while they were changing the set.
That's pretty amazing talent you had to do that.
If you do it every week, it's like anything.
And then you knew your product quite well.
It really wasn't so much about doing the product. You were selling the people and the service.
Remember some of the things you would do? Can you do a commercial right here?
Oh, the one that always, what we call the Bring 'em Back Alive commercial, I always did after Christmas. There was a commercial that went kind of, happy holiday to you from all of us at Clarke's. Certainly we at Clarke's would not the happiness of your Christmas to be spoiled by errors in the gifts you received. If you received any gift from Clarke's, we'll gladly and cheerfully make it right. Come in and see any of our friendly staff, and they'll be glad to make the exchange. Some of you may have had the good fortune of receiving a Clarke's gift certificate. It is good for any item at any time, just like greenbacks. So happy holiday to you from all of us at Clarke's.
That's very good.
Well, I did that commercial every year, more or less. I changed it a little bit. You're selling service. We sold clothes, but what business are you really in? We were in the appearance business. We had to make people feel better, and you weren't selling needs. You were creating desire and want. Madge was good at that. She was just fantastic. Won a silver Addy. Lost her way too soon. She was 62 when she passed away.
You did radio commercials, too.
Madge and I did some radio commercials. She projected so much stronger than I did when we were talking that she'd have to sit behind me about 3 feet, and then we'd talk. Dick Schmitz, Irving Productions. Dick and I met in the JCs in 55, 56. When I was president, he was a director. And then he was one of the big 7 DJs from KKC, a rock and radio station.
Yeah.
Then he started the production company, and Madge started using him for all our production. I haven't seen him for some time, but we're still good friends.
When you did the TV for Channel 8, John Chick, you said.
Johnny Chick, yeah, did the sound. That was Mr. Zing and Tuffy, the children's show. In fact, they came on right after us. We had to get in there at 9 o'clock and had to get 2 commercials. And I think they came on at 11 or 12, something like that. But they'd be breaking down our set, setting up their set as soon as we got through. Well, Johnny did all the sound, or a lot of the sound on those. Sadie at that time was our account executive.
Sadie
Adwan, who later ran the station. And I'll say this, we never were out there to cut a spot when Sadie didn't come through sometime while we were there, just to be sure everything was going on. That's customer service. She knew we were going to be there, and she didn't stay long, but just touch base, and that's what there's not a whole lot of anymore. There used to be an old saying that everyone wants service, but no one's willing to pay for it. And that's kind of what's happened.
He was known as John Chick on
John
your
Chick.
calling. You call
Johnny Chick.
He did the TV programs, but he would take a bet on you.
Well, we'd be ready to do a commercial, and I'd go over at the corner of the studio with my script, and I'd be going through it, because when you come back on the TV, you want to be as relaxed and as natural as you can be. And so I'd come back. They had a loudspeaker in the studio. They said, Harry, give me a test. I'd recognize voice, so I'd give him testing 1, 2, 3, and still a commercial. Just before we were ready to do the countdown, Johnny would come on and he'd say, Harry, I got $5 on you. And that meant that he'd bet some stranger in there that I was going to nail the commercial the first take. And I did, about 80, 90% of the time. But it's talking about putting a little extra pressure on you.
Being on television, too, back then, had to kind of make a celebrity out of you. I mean, wherever you went.
Oh, not really. I tell you an interesting story on that. We were on the 10 o'clock news, and we've been on the 10 o'clock news for a long time. So Madge came in one day, and she said, Harry, I think I'm going to shift part of our television schedule to the 6 o'clock news. And I said, fine. So we did that. I hadn't been on it a week, and I had people I'd run into say, hey, when did you start doing television? Because it's an entirely different audience. 6 o'clock at night, there's a whole group of different people that watch the 6 o'clock news and watch the 10 o'clock.
Let's talk about some of the promotions, the downtown store now, back in the 50s. And
Okay.
what were some of the promotions that you would do?
You had your holiday, you had your Christmas, you had Easter, you had Father's Day, Mother's Day a little less. We were at that time really heavily a men's store. There was a photographer, and it was called the Bragging Wagon. He had a little trailer set up. We did a promotion look-alike, dad and son. The parking meters at that time, you had to pay for the meter for a week, and we'd park that little trailer like a house trailer, not very big, but it had signs on it. And you'd come down there, and he would take the picture, and then the prize was which father-son looked the most alike. We did that for a number of years. That was a good promotion.
Did you have a promotion called Miss Teen?
Dance Party. That was a little later. That really came after Utica. When we opened Utica, the teenage shop was called the Miss Tulsa shop. At that time, we worked with 2 or 3 manufacturers. Thermojack was a big teen women's apparel provider. So we had a Thermojack board. And I still, in fact, not too long ago, ran into someone and said, well, I was on the Thermojack board.
Thermojack was what?
Manufacturer, it was an updated teen shop. And then Channel 6 did the dance party every Saturday. That was kind of a takeoff of the National Dance Party. We had sponsors in that. One time we had ice cream cones. Then they changed the laws to where unless you had running water in the scoop deal, you couldn't get it out. There's a picture I've got of 1957 Straw Hat Day. It's a big day. General Joe Turner was a good friend of ours who was the World War hero and was head of the Air National Guard here for a long time. He flew a B-26 down almost between the buildings. I mean, he rattled every window in town. And on the third pass, they dumped out 3 dozen straw hats. The street's full of people. I mean, there's no traffic. It's wall-to-wall people from 3rd Street to 6th Street. And the deal was, if you got one of these straw hats, you could come in and get one that fit you.
It must have been a scramble.
I was in school. Herb Coulter, who was Dad's right hand, knocked on his door, and he said, Mr. Clarke, you got to come see this. They had no idea that it would be that big of a deal, but it was. And like I say, there wasn't room to put another person in there. But it was during lunch hours. See, everyone went to lunch pretty much the same time, 12 to 1. All the office buildings, all the oil companies. We did a couple like that. We did a Hickok belt promotion. The Hickok salesman had an airplane, so we were going to give away, I think, 100 belts. We took gliders, little airplane gliders. And my job, I had to glue them all together, test the flying and get them going. And they took these up. In fact, somewhere I got a picture of me standing out by the plane. I guess I was about 8 years old, 9, something like that. But they took those up, did kind of the same thing. Flew over certain neighborhoods and things and they'd dump out these gliders. And, of course, they'd glide all over. But if you got a glider, you'd come down and get your belt.
And there was never any problems that came out from that.
Nah.
If you did it today, it would be wild. Something would be wrong.
No, like I thought, I grew up 25th and Lewis. The back door was always open. Mom may not have been there. As long as I had my bicycle and we played work-up, there was nothing organized. But the kids in the neighborhood, we'd go down to Cassia Hall and play on their ball diamond in the summer and play work-up. And then when I got hungry, I'd come home, and if Mom wasn't there was always a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in the icebox and a glass of milk, so I was happy as a June bug. I never had a helmet. Streets weren't paved. There was kind of a gutter on each side of the streets. Like I say, they weren't paved, they were oil, and they graded them once a year. Oh, we loved it when they graded the streets. Everyone out watching. But then when it rained, the water would flow down each side of the street. We'd make boats and float them. We could go from Lewis clear on down to Yorktown, 2 blocks in the gutter on those streets.
Life was really good, wasn't it?
Oh, hey, it was. We had a great time.
In your adult life, and you were running the store then as a young man, the mayors that would have been of city of Tulsa.
Jim Maxwell was the first one I really was involved with. Jim was a JC, was president a couple, 3 years ahead of me, became mayor 32 years old, I think, and was, 5 terms. Jim talked me into spending 3 years on the Planning Commission, which is an experience. 106 public hearings that I sat through. You don't make a lot of friends, but I think we did a lot of good. I talked to Dad about it before I did, and he said, no, go do it. Vote your conscience. Do what you think. Ed Doobie was chairman of that. Parson Eccles, who was the rector, Trinity Episcopal Church, was on it. There's great people on that.
The name of the committee was?
The City
Commission,
County Metropolitan Area Planning Commission. Each county commissioner had a couple of appointments. The mayor had 2 or 3 appointments that did all the zoning, did all the planning. I was on there from 57 to 60, 3 years. We approved the expressway plan while I was on that, and I lived to see it completed. Broken Arrow Expressway, all of it, the interdispersal loop, that was all planned and done. Interesting here, too, still a good friend of mine. At that time, Ken Neal was running the City Beat.
Of the Tulsa World.
Yeah, who had just retired as one of their editorial staff, I believe, in January. But he was covering the City Beat, and I always thought he was a neat guy. I never saw him miscarry anything or report what didn't happen. It was just right up, heads up all the way. I saw him, about a year ago in Utica Square. Queenie's having lunch. But Jim was in there. Of course, L.C. Clarke I knew. People thought we were related, but we spelled our name with an E. He didn't, but I knew L.C.
And who was L.C. Clarke?
L.C. Clarke was a mayor. He had Clarke Darling Hardware. They were in the hardware business, among other things. That was before Jim. And then Hughley, of course, was in there, who I know. In fact, they're one that I've kind of kept track of. Sid Patterson was street commissioner, who was up with trees, which I think is one of the greatest. You're talking about just coming up with something that really is caught on and I think improved Tulsa's look so much. Hundreds of companies have gotten involved in that.
Gilcrease Expressway would have been part of your expressway?
Yeah, Gilcrease was part of it. The only part of it that wasn't the southeast, which was Maple Ridge, that, I say, was changed because it ran right through a very nice addition. It's one of those deals, if they'd done it earlier, it would have been all right, but that was one of the early additions, kind of south of Lee School. But basically, it was built to Broken Arrow. The loop was virtually built as it was designed at that point. And now they've extended it, expanded it, widened it.
Any other issues that the city had back there in the 50s, 60s?
I remember when the City Hall, which they've just moved out of, and the Maxwell Arena, when it was first built, that's one of the changes. When I headed the United Way Drive in 71, we had a kickoff dinner and we had a kickoff, and now they do it with a kind of a rally. It's interesting the change takes place, but that's where they would hold the dinners at that big assembly hall there. And of course, back when I was in the JCs, we worked on the Gilcrease. We had a bond issue for the Gilcrease.
For a museum?
Yeah, from the museum. Thomas Gilcrease, as I recall, had all this collection of art, but the oil, as it did, cycled down, and he couldn't meet the obligation. So he said, if the city will raise the money, I'll give it and give my home, which he did. And we worked every lunch hour. We'd give up lunch and we'd go out and work the streets. We had a speaker car and stand on the corner and pass out leaflets and flyers. That was fun, good things.
Then the vote came in.
The vote came in, and the vote was successful. That and Philbrook both. Enjoyable.
You were involved in all this because you liked to do it. You didn't do it because of your business, or did you?
No, it connects. But Madge took the arts because she was an artist. So she took the arts. She loved the ballet, and I would like the orchestra, but she took those, and I took the chamber and the United Way. Yeah, I like being a part of it. That's where it's at. In Tulsa, the finest people, that's where you meet them. They're involved in the civic area of the city. That's where I met Henry and lots of other people that were all involved. Alfred Aronson was one. Alfred was on the planning commission, but the library was his passion.
So we have the Aronson Auditorium today.
Absolutely, that's why. But he was an oilman, and he just fought and fought and fought for our libraries. Talk about people always think of Dan P. Holmes and Highway 33. What a institution he was. Of course, that's now, I guess, 412. Mm-hmm. You can go way out there, and it's 4-lane. Used to be a tough ride. As a kid, you're always, when are we going to get there? When are we going to get there? And if we were coming home from a trip, I remember the KVOO towers, 3 tall towers that were way out on 11th Street. When I finally saw those towers, I knew we were getting close to home.
You remember some of the names of employees that would have worked in your store, in particular downtown?
Herb Coulter was the gentleman that headed the women's division. Herb started with Dad at Bristow, and then he left to come over to go to TU. And then when Dad opened the store here, Herb came back. He was his right hand, and he was really involved in the men's division. Then at a point in time, the gentleman that was running the women's floor left. So Dad said, Herb, go up and look after that till I can find someone, and he never left. Of course, he went to the service, went into the war, and came back. He was in the PX service, but came back and ran the women's division until he passed away. He was like a second father to me. He was a great, great guy. And then Harold Castleman, the bald-headed gentleman, he and I were always together. The store was really kind of organized, had 4 floors. First floor was men's furnishing, sportswear, and shoes. Second was men's clothing. Third was women's. And fourth was the boys' department and the office. There was a person in charge of each floor. You bought the merchandise and you hired the people. In other words, you had to buy it and you had to sell it. So the first floor, Harold Castleman was running that when I came back into business, and he and I worked together. Then Herb ran the third floor, and Jack Hensley ran the clothing department and the second floor, and then my brother-in-law, Bill Wright, ran the boys' department. And the advertising was on the 4th floor with that. So shortly after I came back, Castleman got pulled away to go to Kerr's in Oklahoma City, which was a department store. Better job. He left in 1957, I remember, because I came home from a JC convention. The family always got together on Sunday evening at folks' house for dinner, just kind of a standing family deal. So we're having dinner, and Dad said, Castleman's leaving. Do you want a job? And I said, yes, I do. I guess that's when the fun began. Finally I had something to do. I had a responsibility. I took it, and it was mine. And I loved buying, I loved promoting, I loved hiring the people. I guess if anything I love to do more than anything else is motivate people. Success is not out there someplace, it's in your head. I always go back to one of the things I always loved to use. In the Olympics, there was a high jumper called Fosbury, and he did the Fosbury flip, which was the first backward kind of flip over the bar. But when he would start, he'd rock back and forth. Someone asked him what he was doing when he was doing that, and he said, I'm picturing myself going over the bar. So I used that thousands of times in promotional meetings. Picture yourself succeeding. Picture yourself making the sale. Most of us tend to do the other. Hope I don't mess this up.
Right.
So you've got to do that positive.
Remember some really outstanding salespeople you had that were really successful?
Noel Holmes. Noel Holmes had been in Tulsa. He'd had a business gone in the Dakotas, and he came back, and Coulter brought him to me, and he said, Harry, this is Noel Holmes, and you need to give him a job. He's good. It was Christmas time. I needed to have it. I said, fine. So Noel came in about Thanksgiving and led the floor through the holidays, even though he wasn't one of the regulars. And so then I said, what about clothing? You want to take a shot at clothing? He said, yeah, I'd like to do that. So we moved him up the second floor, and he again took off like a skyrocket. About in that time, the gentleman that was merchandising that passed away, quite unexpectedly. I said to Noel, would you like to help me merchandise this? And he said, yeah. And so he and I worked together for, I guess, 10, 12 years. And it was great. My philosophy was I like to surround myself with people that I felt good with, that I felt comfortable with. We were talking about Castleman, that guy that went to Kerr's. When we opened Utica in 61, I called Harold and I said, we're getting ready to open a suburban store and I want you to run it. And he did. We opened that in 6 weeks after we got the lease. Oklahoma Fixture, we were designing it during the day. They were building fixtures at night, installing them the next day. Castleman was putting the people together and Coulter was putting the merchandise together. Less than 2 months, not much time, but we opened. Then we opened Southland. He opened that store, and then after that he became the operational vice president. He and I were just like two brothers. We got a lot of things to get done, but he and I worked till 6:37. We'd go and get a bite of dinner, come back and work till 11, 12. It was work, but it
was fun.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. No, you got to love what you do. Really only had 2 bad years in the retail business, and those were the 2 after I sold the business, when I had a contract with M.M. Cohn.
The only 2 years that were bad were after?
For me, were after I sold the business. In other words, you sell a business, and you usually got a couple of years contract to stay around, and I think you're supposed to be seen and not heard. But I could see mistakes being made. It tore me apart.
And who did you sell the store to?
M.M. Cohn in Little Rock.
That was clothing? They
were very fine clothing. They did more business than we did. They were kind of the Neiman Marcus of Arkansas. Very fine family apparel store.
What brought you to that decision to sell it?
Madge had some health issues, and we lost her, in fact, 2 years to the day. My contract ended 2 years after the sale, and she passed away 1 day later. But she had a contract till she was 65 to stay on with them. And they needed someone here to run the promotion. They were going to do most of the stuff out of Little Rock, but they still needed someone here.
When you sold then, how many stores did you have?
6. We'd closed Joplin. Joplin economy had tanked a little bit. We had a chance to get out of it, so we felt like it was a good business decision to do it.
Then in town you had the 4?
4 in Tulsa and 2 in Oklahoma City.
Because you were downtown, Utica Square, Southland,
and Woodland.
Then you did go to Woodland.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Woodland was a good store. It wasn't as strong. You measure a store on dollars per square foot. Woodland is a younger mall. On the other hand, there were some people that liked to shop out there that we'd send merchandise out for.
And the downtown store survived through all of this until your sale.
Yeah. Really, we should have closed it probably 5 or 6 years before. I tell you, if you make mistakes in judgment, many times it's emotional mistakes. That's where it began. You just hate to do it, and we should have done it. I think Madge knew it, and I think I knew it. I would have been tough on Mom if we'd have done it. When we changed the SIG, the original Clarkes were little fat letters, and then we modernized it. Late 60s. I'd go to a lot of seminars and get ideas. You need to get inspiration, and you need to get out of your business some. So I went to one, and then the Hudson Bay Company was the one that they were talking about. That was up in Canada, and Hudson Bay is kind of old as can be. They were losing their business. They were stuffy, stodgy. This company had consulted with them, and they changed it and turned the company around, and they went to the Bay. So Madge and I talked about it. We decided to go to Clarke's and do it all lowercase, and that's the way for 10 years the SIGs were. The CLARKE''S was done in lowercase. I bet we had 100. We had the art department doing Clarke's every way you could conceive. And this one kept coming back to us. So we're going to make the change, and I said to Madge, before we do this, we need to go out and talk to Mom. Mom at that time was in her 90s. She lived to be 97. Neat lady. Oh, great class, angel. Marvelous to take care of. Appreciated everything. After Madge passed away, then Jackie and I took care of her. Go to Tulsa and take her to the grocery store. Every Thursday, take her to get her hair done. Richard had been doing her hair for, I guess, 25 years. And he pampered her. So we took this cig out to show it to Mom. And Madge gave her the spiel of why times are changing, showed her the cig. She looked at it, and a tear came out of the corner of her eye. Oh, gosh. I'm telling you, talking about feeling bad. Tear came down her cheek, and she said, "You're not even going to spell Clarke with a capital C." I guess we were there an hour and a half, but she finally came around. Madge was good at that. She had a lot of props and things to show her, but that was one of the toughest job I ever had, was taking her car away from her at 90.
Why did you feel you needed to change the SIG, the lettering?
The old SIG was dated. Like I say, it had started in 14, and it was just not today.
Yeah.
We dropped the good clothes. It's interesting that I've had a number of people that were very smart, Harvard MBAs, things like that I knew, that were in the advertising business, and say, "Why are you keeping that good clothes?" And I said, "Well, it's been pretty good to us." But we kind of felt like, okay, it's time. Still, I'll run into people and they'll say, "Well, I shop Clarke's Good Clothes." Pays your money and takes your choice.
Yeah, well, it didn't hurt your business any.
No, but I don't think that...
You were identified.
You know, if there was one mistake, it would be the biggest one I saw that M.M. Cohn make when they bought the business. About 6 months after they bought it, they changed the name from Clarke's to M.M. Cohn. And the day they changed the name, the sales started down dramatically. And I had friends say, they insulted us all. When Bill Dillard bought Brown Duncan's, it was Brown Duncan's for 3 or 4 years. Then it was Dillard's Brown Duncan's for 3 or 4 years. And finally, it was Dillard's. He was smart enough to step it step by step, give people a chance to get used to it. He'd modernize the stores.
Communities take ownership.
Oh, hey, no question about it. You ask people, where did you shop? Well, Clarke's, Renberg's. Those were the two, as far as apparel, that would pop into their mind. There were lots of others. Streets was another one. There was a bunch of other stores. But yeah, they feel like, and that's what you want. You want them to feel like
it was their store.
Their store, yeah, absolutely. You run a retail store from the selling floor. You don't run it from an office. It's interesting because Castleman and I, the manager, were so close. In Southland, I was standing by him one day, and a lady came in with a problem, and she went up to him rather than me. She got right up in his face, and she said, "Mr. Clarke," and she was telling him her problem. And I just moved away. I just let him handle it. I thought, well, there's no sense me getting in this. But people do, yeah. They take pride. And I think the fact that we were very involved in the city.
How long then did M.M. Cohn last?
4 years.
And they left because business went down the tube.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
When you sold the business, would you say you were at the peak, or was it beginning to come down?
We were still growing, but I was tired of working 90 hours a week. Madge's health was poor. I can see that. I didn't see her passing away in 2 years. But it was just time. That I had lots of debt, and I could see that I could just get rid of some. M.M. Cohn were very similar. We were about 85% the same lines. Like I say, the biggest mistake they made is change the name. The day they changed the name, and they lost over half the business in 4 years.
Wow. That had to hurt you because even though you weren't in the business, it was theirs. Just emotionally, something that your dad started, to see it change and then to see it go away.
Well, if you sell a business, you've got to realize that can happen, and it happens more often than not, probably. I think they should have survived, but...
You sold at a good time then. It was good timing.
Well, I sold because it was just a good time for us. But then in 82, the cycle went down in the oil business. Everyone said, "How come you were so smart to sell when you did?" Well, it wasn't that I was so smart. It was just like it was the time. Life is timing, and we were lucky on that.
When was it you sold? What year?
Closed December of 82. I remember we went down, closed at the BOK. That was our bank, and the happiest day. M.M. Cohn assumed all the debt and took over the business.
Was that a tough day for you?
Yes and no. You're working up to it. So you knew it was coming. Like I say, not near as tough as the 2 years that followed.
Because you had to be in the store.
Yeah, I had come to work like everyone else, and they'd give me whatever jobs they wanted to give me. And
they were hoping the public seeing your face in the store would help.
No, the jobs they gave me, I wasn't where the public could see me usually.
Well, then why would you stay on? Why did they have you on?
Well, they paid me. You have a contract. You have a contract to fulfill, and I fulfilled that contract. I had my pride. I was going to be to the end and perform. Every job they gave me was performed in an exceptionally fine way. If they asked me to speak, I blew any other people away with what I did. That's the way we were. Yeah, there's only one way to do something, and that's right up top.
Where would you go on your buying trips? Where would you buy your clothes?
Clothing was bought in New York. A lot of the women's was bought in New York. Dallas was a big market. There's probably 6 women markets in Dallas a year, and then the gift market. But then you got cosmetics. I spent 4.5 months a year on the road someplace. Worked 3 shows in Chicago. January 15th in Chicago is not much fun. It's been cold till you've been in Chicago. We're there one time when the lake froze over. We were working with Hart, Scheffner, and Marks. They took us to the John Hancock building for lunch. And as far as you could see over Lake Michigan was just jagged chunks of ice sticking up.
So there you were buying clothes.
Well, at some point, you develop a staff of buyers. We had 13 buyers. We had 2 divisionals. In other words, we had a man that supervised the 4 men's buyers, and we had another guy, Rick Sunlighter, that supervised the women's buyers. And then we had a divisional that supervised all of them, but I would go into the market, and I would spend the day with each buyer. Mary Lee was a sportswear buyer, passed away recently. Had Mary Lee's in Utica Square. The most talented women's buyer I ever met. She worked for us, and she was Jewel. So we're going to New York, and she said, I want you to come with me on Thursday. She said, we're going to Liz Claiborne, which, is a very fine ladies' line. I said, fine. So I worked my schedule. I'd go with a children's gal one time. I enjoyed it, dress buyer one day, and trying to be helpful, but basically that's their buy. Their bonus and everything's based on that. But we go into Liz Claiborne's. All of a sudden, a little person comes in a black men's tailored suit with short hair slicked back. I didn't really know what it was, whether it was a man or a woman. It was Liz Claiborne. Oh, sharp, just as sharp as she can be. But that was her look. I mean, just not a hair out of place. And she was charming.
So you carried her line for many years?
Oh, yeah. I've kind of gotten out of touch, but I think it's still a good line. Yeah, you hunted for those. Mary Lee was so good at that. Rick, her husband, was the divisional. They met in the store and got married. Rick was over the women's division, and Mary Lee came as a junior buyer. And then when the women's buyer retired, she stepped up. She merchandised $2.5 million worth of women's sportswear, which is a big job. After we closed, they opened Mary Lee's in Utica Square, and she passed away of cancer within the last year. Sad day. Lost what I call alumni. I loved those kids. We hired a lot of them, and they were like family. Rod McCalman was another one that we lost in the last year. Rod was the manager of the Southland store, the big store. After we sold, he went to Miss Jackson's and managed Miss Jackson's up until a couple of years ago.
Back in the 50s in the stores, did you have air conditioning?
Oh, yeah. I remember when I was a kid, I used to love to go downtown to the store because it was cool. We had a carrier. It was a huge plant, 3 stories tall, big cooling towers and everything. But, yeah, they were cool. I remember the Renberg fire in December of 45. I was in school. I came home from school. I was in the airport in St. Louis and heard that the downtown district of Tulsa was on fire. I didn't know who or why. When I got in late that night, Dad told me they'd been in the store and smoked.
Renberg was right next door to you?
Right next door. Yeah, it completely burned it, and it smoked up a lot of our... he was about half sick with smoke and eyes all puffed.
Amazing they could save your store.
Oh, yeah. Well, the roof fell in. Probably what saved the whole block. When the tar roof fell in, it let the heat out top. Of course, we had their wall and our wall, but it scorched the boxes that were backing up against the walls. It was, if I remember, December 19th.
Of 45?
45, yeah. I got in, and we went to work that next morning, cleaning up to see what we could salvage and get the store open for Christmas. We opened, I think, 3 days later.
The smoke did not damage all your merchandise?
No, the things that were in boxes, the smoke browned the boxes, but the merchandise that was inside, and the things that were in cases, merchandise that was exposed, insurance company picked it up.
How many stores were affected by that? It started in Renberg's?
Yeah, it started in Renberg's. They were the only store that burned, but there were Globe and Dick Barton's on the other side. We were on this side. There were 2 shoe stores beside us, Flags and another one, and then Walgreens was on the corner. I'm sure it smoked everyone up somewhat.
So you sold the stores, and then you spent your 2 years with M.M. Cohen. You were what age then?
Late 50s.
Late 50s, a very young man. Did you think you were going to retire?
Yeah. I had a little place up in Vail, Colorado, and loved to ski, and then I had the place up here and loved to fish. I had some real estate investments in Tulsa. I had the distribution center, and I thought, well, I'll spend part of my time doing that and part of my time up Grand Lake. That's not such a bad life up here.
The distribution center?
Well, we had a warehouse as we got more stores, which was on 38th Street. 7333 East 38th Street. It's still there, but it was where all the merchandise came and was processed, and we took it into the store. As you get into shopping centers, that space is so valuable that you can't afford to do your marking and your processing. You've got to go to a warehouse, or you got to have someplace. Some businesses did it in their downtown stores where they really didn't need it.
So even though you'd left retail, you had this distribution center.
Well, it was leased.
Oh, so
Marsuco,
others.
I had it leased, and then I didn't have it leased, and then you couldn't give it away. Listen, that's a whole other chapter. But I lasted 8 months in retirement, and I was going nuts.
Then
my fishing friend up here was Don Butler, the old Bass Pro.
Yeah.
#1 member of Bass. Neat guy.
Yeah.
And he said, heck, go get your real estate license. And he said, come work for us. So I've been doing that for 18 years.
Here in the Grand Lake area?
Grand Lake area, and I used to work the whole lake. Now I don't work quite the whole lake. I kind of stay to the south end. But it keeps me off the street, and I enjoy it. I spend 2 days in the office. Everything's on computer nowadays. All of the multi-list and everything is on the internet, so I can do it anywhere.
So as you reflect, I have a hunch you're going to say Clarke's Good Clothes store downtown in the 50s and 60s had to be a sweet spot of your life.
Yeah, well, the whole Clarke's experience. The suburban stores, too. Southland was a jewel. More merchants came through to look at Southland. We were laying the store out. It had 21,000 square feet on the main floor, which wasn't quite enough. So we made the decision to put the clothing department in the basement. Malcolm McCune was the architect who laid out originally Utica Square. Neat guy. Loved him. And I said, we're considering doing this. And he designed, you may remember, the stairwell that went down into there. We called it the Imperial Room. And it gave us more space. That basement space did over $1 million worth of clothing business back in that period of time. So I've got to say I loved the downtown, but I loved the experience of the 50s and 60s. That would take you through Southland. Southland did its 5th-year projection the first year. We opened in an ice storm and had 40,000 people through the store the first 3 days. I thought we were going to wear the carpets out in the opening.
That's when all of Southland opened. You were there at the beginning of Southland.
At the beginning of Southland.
Right. And there was no hesitation on you to say, well, they're going to build a shopping center and we're going to go there. You knew that was a smart thing.
Oh, we were in there. Well, I tell you, the time I spent on the Planning Commission gave me a pretty good understanding of demographics. I'd spent hours and hours and hours at night. You take how many houses are in each square mile, and that is the sweet spot in southeast Tulsa.
For those who don't remember, Southland was on which corner?
Promenade. It's now Promenade.
It's now Promenade.
Yeah.
That was Southland. And
South Roads was on the north side, and that's where all the box stores are.
And Southland was first.
Well, Southland was supposed to be opened in 62, and it didn't get open until 65. South Roads opened later.
So that opening in Southland, 40,000 in the next 3 days.
3 days, yeah. Thursday, Friday, Saturday we opened. It was wall-to-wall people. They were ready. It was unbelievable. With Utica, we'd started Coffee Call. When we opened Utica, we were looking for a hook If you get a couple shopping together and the woman wants to try on something, what does the husband do? Well, if he could have a cup of coffee. So we found out we could buy Noritake china, cups and saucers by the gross. And they always had too many, always get a good price on them. We put a dishwasher in. We put a coffee maker, made a deal with Cane's Coffee, and we developed Coffee Call. We made little drugstore tables with wire chairs, and that was such a hit that when we did Southland, it was right in the center of the store. It was before you got on the escalator, right around the corner there, right in front of the service desk. Again, if you got a service problem, sit down, have a cup of coffee. We'll have this gift wrap, whatever it was. But Southland was the jewel. I have to say, I love downtown and all that, but after the first year, we went to Max Campbell, who was the developer, and said, hey, we want our second floor. We had a right to request that at a certain point in volume, and we reached it the first year.
When you put in the Southland store, did the Utica store take a hit in business?
No, not at all.
You feared that?
We had programmed 20% hit. None at all. It stayed even one year. Our philosophy was to keep the advertising percentage going. And so as soon as it started knocking the figures out, we increased the advertising.
And downtown stayed strong, too.
No, downtown just kept...
Did that begin to suffer as Southland?
It already had. We'd lost half our downtown volume before we got Utica open. Yeah, that was tough. That's one thing in the planning process. It's hard to get people to go where they don't want to go. You know, you can say what you want. I love downtown. But convenience. When I grew up at 25th and Lewis, I could walk 2 blocks, catch the bus, and I was downtown in 15 minutes for nickel. When I lived out there behind St. Francis Hospital, hey, it was a run to get downtown. I think they're doing some right. I think the BOK Center is probably dynamite move for downtown.
When that shopping center opened Southland, though, the whole town was just ready for this brand new concept, wasn't it?
There was nothing out there. A lot of housing, but there was really no center. Utica is a unique center. Utica will always be a great center, and I love it. That's where Jackie and I go for lunch when we go to town. But you don't have the space there for Dillard's and Macy's and Penny's, the big stores.
And then Southland came along first indoor mall.
It wasn't an indoor mall when it was opened. It was an outdoor mall. The mall was not covered with Southland. Southland was an open mall. You could get from store to store. There was trees. We could get to Walgreens. Interesting, the same lady that ran the counter at Walgreens downtown later ran the one at Utica, later ran the one at Southland. Ollie Boggs, I think, was her name. We'd go in, and Castle and I go in and have a cup of coffee, 3:30, 4 in the afternoon, you know, just kind of relax for a few minutes. She made the best short stack I ate in my life. When the weather was bad downtown, I'd go down early because we opened the store at 8 for the cleaning people, and I didn't want them standing out in the cold. So I'd go down, and then I'd let them in. Then I'd go next door to Walgreens, get a short stack. Short stack cup of coffee was 51 cents then.
In the 50s.
Yeah, it was in the 50s. But like I say, I've had a lot of short stacks in my day, but Ollie made the best short stack that I ate in my life.
There's a romanticism that goes with this. It kind of makes me almost envious of the time that you lived and the good time that you had.
Oh, listen, as far as I'm concerned, there wasn't a better time in Tulsa. The town wasn't that big. It just was great.
You give me a warm feeling about your family, your mother, your father.
Hey.
You had a good family that you came from.
Oh, we had a good family. You know, if you're building a business, every dime we could come up with went in the business. We didn't have a fancy home. It was a nice home. It's at 25th in Lewis. It's still there. I drive by it every now and then. Dad paid $11,500 for it, I think. 3 bedrooms, 1 bath. Furnace didn't work very well. But we all grew up there. We didn't really move out of there until I was gone. Imagine, we were all gone out of the house. Dad had a heart attack after that, and he couldn't get up and down the stairs. You know, it was a neat neighborhood. Shoot, Utica Square at that time was a bowling alley and a miniature golf course, and the hospital was the Little Red Hospital over there. Saul's Grill was right across the street. Times were good. Sometimes everything's got to be so grandiose, and I think sometimes everything gets over-organized. We had a bunch of great kids in that neighborhood, and they all got along great. I had the best. My dad had Parkinson's for 12 years. Mom took care of him. My kids have done well.
And let's name your children.
I've got a son, Harry Jr., and lives outside of Washington, D.C. He's the young one. He went through the MBA program at Stillwater and just was fortunate enough to get on with IBM. Spent 15 years with IBM and then was with BMC and then was McAfee Security and now is president of Handysoft, a small software company outside of Washington, Oakton. Then Kathy is in Edmond. She's the principal of Cross Timbers, a large grade school over there. She has 2 daughters. A younger one's at OU, just selected as one of the 12 outstanding sophomores. Her older one was a merit semifinalist, went to University of Georgia. They both made the Palm squads as freshmen in their schools. Hey, life is good. My kids, we ate dinner at 7 o'clock usually, but we had dinner every evening together and laugh and talk. And, I think that's one of the problems. I had goals for my kids. I wanted them each to play an individual sport, and I wanted them each to be on a team sport. So I wanted them to learn they got to be part of a team, but in the final analysis, if it is to be, it is up to me, which is 10 two-letter words that say the way life is. And that came from an oil man, Swearingen, Wayne Swearingen. He and I used to swap sayings. Dad had 100 of them. You get what you inspect, not what you expect.
You get what you inspect.
Inspect, not what you expect. But Wayne was good. If I'd see him anywhere, we always tried to have one. His brother was a professor when I was in Stillwater, an economic professor, but later became president of BOK.
His name?
Gene Swearingen.
Gene, and then it was Wayne.
Wayne was, I think, president of LVO. Gene used to tell the story that his mother thought Wayne was changing jobs too many. Every 2 or 3 years he'd change jobs, but he kept moving up in these oil companies. She wanted him to stay with one job and then stay with it. Oh, John, I've just been so fortunate, so lucky. A lot of good friends like you.
Well, here you are 80.
80 last December.
And your mother lived to be?
97, so I've got some good genes.
You've got another 20 years to go, don't you?
Yeah. Part of my health, I had a great internist named Bob Lubin, who was just marvelous and straightened me out early when I didn't eat right and didn't exercise and was workaholic and got me to start jogging. I jogged 2 miles this morning. Not too fast anymore, but
Right.
Got me eating right and getting out of the business.
When's the last time you've been fishing?
Well, I haven't fished all winter. It's interesting as you get older, these old bones don't take to the cold weather like they used to, but it won't be long.
Well, thank you, Harry, for this. This was very good.
Oh, hey, I've enjoyed it.
You just told us about the way it was back then, and we wish we would have been there with you.
Well, you were there part of it, though. You and I met.
I was in 76 when I came to Tulsa,
Draw your dad contest. We had a contest, Father's Day. You had to come in the store. You had to draw a picture of your dad for Father's Day, and he won a bicycle. We gave away about 10 bicycles. You were nice enough to be the judge on that. Yeah, Madge said, they've got this nice new guy down at KRMG. I'm going to ask him to do it. So.
And Ron Blue brought me in there.
Ron Blue, yeah. We'd had so many great people. Quick story there. We had a vacation promotion. Ron came to Madge and said, Madge, I'd like to put this promotion up for promotion of the year or something. I don't know. But anyway, we had a rule. We didn't enter contests. We were in business to do business. Some stores get so carried away with trying to enter window contests and all this. So Madge came to me, and Ron said he'd do all of it. I said, fine. We like Ron. And we won the Governor's Cup that year for vacation promotions. We did a deal 2 weeks during the summer, Oklahoma Vacation Land, and we got all kind of brochures in the stores around Coffee Call promoting Oklahoma. So Madge and I drove down. George Nye was the governor at that time. He presented the award. He and I laughed. We had a good time together because he and I had been friends before. And I've still got that plaque over here at the lake up on the wall. I always laugh about that. You know who we beat out for that? Daily Oklahoman.
Oh.
So little organizations can win.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
That was great.
You have been listening to the Voices of Oklahoma podcast. Stories taken from the oral history website, voicesofoklahoma.com. At the website, you will discover an array of storytellers. Many you will know. Some will be new to you, but all will be worth your time. This work depends on listeners like you, who are interested in learning about the great people of Oklahoma. Our website provides an opportunity to donate to this 501c3 project, which preserves Oklahoma history, one voice at a time. voicesofoklahoma.com